darkness, truths unravel. Welcome to Dark Room Narratives, where every story leaves a shadow.
Welcome, adventurers. Prepare to step into the darkness, where ancient myths awaken and new horrors unfold. This is your journey. Are you ready?
The Carpathian region met them with an unusual silence, a heavy blanket descending upon the forests and mountains. Taras and Lina stepped off the train at a small station where the only sign of civilization was a leaning wooden building that served as a ticket office, waiting room, and even an impromptu shop. The heavy backpack pressed down on Taras's shoulders, while Lina, adjusting her own strap, looked around. "It's a bit creepy, isn't it?" she whispered, even though the sun was still high, casting long shadows from the spruces. The air was filled with the smell of damp earth, pine needles, and something elusive, wild. The map, obtained under mysterious circumstances after the events in the Forgotten City, led them to the Sanctuary of Whisperers, a place that, according to legends, was an ancient abode of molfars, hidden deep within the Carpathian wilderness. Lina clutched the amulet they had brought with them. It pulsed faintly, as if responding to the call of these mountains. They hired an old UAS from a local old man who, upon hearing the name Sanctuary of Whisperers, merely shook his gray head and grumbled something about unclean forces and ancient curses, but took the money without further questions. The road quickly turned into a narrow, rain-washed path where the UAS rattled over every bump, as if about to fall apart. The old man dropped them off at the edge of an old forest road, pointing vaguely into the thicket. "Beyond here is on foot. Even animals don't go there unless others," he rasped, his eyes flashing with a momentary alarm before he turned and drove back, leaving them alone with the forest that silently parted, inviting them into its depths. Taras looked at Lina. "Well, ready for new adventures?" She merely sighed, adjusted her backpack more comfortably, and nodded. The map in her hands, now updated after the Amazon ritual, glowed with a faint but steady light, pointing northeast. The deeper they ventured into the forest, the thicker the air became, filled with mystical whispers that seemed like either the voices of trees or distant animal cries. Tall spruces intertwined overhead, letting through only thin streaks of light that could not dispel the perpetual twilight. The ground beneath their feet was damp with moss and fallen leaves, and every step produced a muffled, squelching sound. They walked for several hours, overcoming fallen tree blockages and dense thickets of blackberries. The forest grew progressively older, majestic, yet oppressive. Here and there, strange patterns appeared on tree bark, either intricate lichens or ancient symbols carved by an unknown hand. Lina stopped by one such tree. Its trunk was abnormally thick, and its branches reached for the sky like bizarre claws. A spiral symbol, similar to the ones they had seen in the Forgotten City, was carved into the bark. "Strange," she murmured, tracing the carving with her finger. "This doesn't look like local traditions. A connection?" Tara shrugged, but felt uneasy. The amulet around his neck suddenly grew hot, as if burning his skin. The air around them suddenly grew cold, and a faint smell of old blood emerged. From the depths of the forest, a low, drawn-out moan echoed, immediately dying down, leaving only a tense silence behind. Taras grabbed the knife hanging from his belt. What was that? Lina, pale, looked around. "I don't know, but something is here." They moved on, stepping cautiously, listening to every rustle. Soon the forest began to change. The trees became even older, their crowns distorted by wind and time, resembling the faces of tormented beings. Isolated stone blocks, covered in moss, appeared, looking too even, too regular for natural formations. These were the remains of some ancient road leading into the heart of the sanctuary. As they advanced, they stumbled upon a stream. The water in it was surprisingly clear, but along the banks lay strange, twisted branches that resembled bones. "Something's not right here," Terrace said, his voice sounding muffled. "Too quiet." The amulets around their necks now pulsed noticeably stronger, as if warning of an imminent threat. Lina picked up one of the branches. It was light, as if dried, but it felt like holding something dead. Suddenly, a sharp cry erupted from behind the trees, not human, but resembling a wolf's howl transitioning into a hoarse cackle. It tore through the silence, making birds fly from the trees. Terrace and Lina immediately crouched, hiding behind a fallen tree. From the thicket emerged shadows, tall, wolf-like figures with glowing red eyes. They moved silently, as if gliding over the ground, their outlines blurred like smoke. These were not just wolves. These were shadows, familiar to them to the chill bone tremor they experienced. "Is it them?" again, Terrace whispered. But these shadows were different. They had clearer outlines, and they exuded a wild, primal terror, distinct from the cold, ancient evil they had encountered in the Forgotten City. Lina clutched the amulet, and it flared with a bright golden light. The shadows stopped, their red eyes momentarily flickering as if unable to withstand the light. "They are afraid of the amulet's light," she exclaimed, but it was too late. From the forest emerged several figures dressed in dark, coarse cloaks with hoods that concealed their faces. These were Druids. Their hands clutched wooden staffs, at the ends of which raw crystals glimmered. One of them, the tallest one, stepped forward. His voice, though muffled by the hood, boomed in the forest's silence. "Strangers, you have desecrated this land. Your blood was spilled in a forbidden place, and now you lead the shadows here." Terrace looked at Lina in surprise. "They know about us?" The Druids resembled ancient, stern guardians whose knowledge stemmed from the very earth. "This land protects itself from those like you," the Druid leader continued, raising his staff. The crystal at the end of it flared with a crimson light, and the wolf-like shadows surged forward again, now ignoring the glow of Lina's amulet. They were not just spirits, but seemed controllable beings, created or tamed by the Druids. "They're using them," Lina cried, and she and Terrace broke into a run, fleeing from the shadow's claws and the Druid's magic, which was already beginning to close around them like an invisible trap. The forest around them suddenly came alive. Branches stretched out to block their path, and roots beneath their feet tried to ensnare them. This was not just a chase, but a test that challenged their determination and strength.
The shadow's claws sliced through the air, and the Druid's magical assault forced Terrace and Lina to plunge headlong deeper into the forest. Roots beneath their feet, like living snakes, tried to ensnare them, and branches reaching out from the darkness lashed at their faces, leaving scratches. Lina looked back, but the dark figures of the Druids vanished as quickly as they appeared, as if the forest itself was their ally. The wolf-like shadows, however, kept pace, their glowing eyes beacons of terror in the thickening darkness. "This way!" Lina shouted, spotting a barely visible path that led uphill between two massive moss-covered boulders. They found themselves trapped. The Druids' magic, it seemed, had sealed off the main routes, forcing them through the most dangerous wilderness. The tension mounted as they ran, feeling the shadows' breath on their necks, and the forest's whispers grew louder, mixing with their own accelerated breathing, each heartbeat echoing a dull thud in their temples. Taras felt a shadow flash by his side and only narrowly dodged sharp claws at the last moment. "They're getting faster!" he gasped, almost tripping over a protruding root. Lina's amulet, though glowing, seemed no longer to deter these wolf-like shadows, only making them hesitate for a moment. The sounds of pursuit were too close. A faint, barely visible cave, camouflaged by vines and dense bushes, loomed ahead. "There!" Lina cried, and without hesitation they plunged inside, hoping for at least a brief respite. Inside it was dark and damp, the air filled with the smell of wet earth and something stale, as if no one had breathed here for centuries. The cave walls were slick with moisture, and water dripped from the ceiling. They pressed themselves against the cold stone, trying to catch their breath, but their hearts still pounded in their chests like mad. Outside, everything fell silent. The shadows stopped at the entrance, and only their heavy breathing, almost physically palpable, echoed from the darkness. It seemed they were waiting, but for what? "We can't stay here long," Lina whispered, lighting her flashlight, which thankfully had survived. Its beam picked out the cave walls from the darkness, covered with strange, roughly carved symbols. These were not the neat patterns left by the ancient inhabitants of the forgotten city. These symbols looked more primitive, but filled with primordial power, as if etched by hands stained with earth and blood. Some images resembled bizarre beasts, others people, with hands raised to the sky, as if in prayer or curse. "These are molfar signs," Taras muttered, moving closer. His knowledge of ancient cultures was limited, but he had heard of the Carpathian molfars, folk sorcerers who drew strength from nature. They hid something here. Suddenly, one of the carved figures on the wall seemed to come alive, its empty eye sockets glinting in the flashlight's beam. It was merely a trick of the light, but Lina felt a chill run down her spine. This cave was not just a hiding place. It was part of the sanctuary, imbued with ancient magic and possibly the wrath of its creators. From deep within the cave, a faint, drawn-out sound, like a low hum, echoed. It was so low that it was felt not by the ears, but by the bones. "What is that?" Taras whispered, and they moved forward, cautiously advancing through the narrow passage. The cave walls began to shimmer, revealing embedded crystals that glowed dimly in the flashlight's light. The hum grew louder, stronger. A few meters further, the passage widened, opening into a small circular chamber, in the center of which lay a huge fragment of wood entwined with vines. It was almost black with age, but through its surface, bluish veins pulsed in rhythm with the hum. The wood had a huge hole in the middle, scorched but not split, as if a powerful lightning bolt had passed through it. This was the Gromovytsia. Around it, on the stone floor, were carved the same crude molfar signs, as well as fresher ones, resembling the runes they had seen in the forgotten city. "This is it?" Lina exhaled, her voice trembling with awe. Her amulet around her neck now glowed brightly, its golden radiance merging with the blue pulsation of the Gromovytsia. But joy was short-lived. As soon as they approached the Gromovytsia, the hum turned into a piercing ringing that shattered the cave's silence. From the shadows swirling in the corners of the chamber, phantoms emerged, translucent, distorted faces with empty eye sockets, seeming to be former molfars whose souls were condemned to guard this place. They wailed, reaching out skeletal hands towards the heroes. It seemed they wanted not so much to harm as to push away, to warn. But behind them, gathered in a circle, stood the Druids. There were 5 of them, and each held a staff, the crystals at their ends glowing crimson, forming an invisible barrier.
The Druid leader, the same tall man, stepped forward. "You have gone too far. This artifact is not for your hands. It restrains what should not awaken. Leave it, or this cave will become your grave." His voice was cold and resolute, without a hint of doubt. Taras and Lina found themselves between two fires, the molfar phantoms trying to push them away and the Druids ready to use force. "We can't leave it," Lina cried, feeling her amulet pulse hotly. "This artifact, it is needed to stop the entity." "The entity? You think you know what the entity is. Your ancestors were fools who opened the way for this horror. We are those who restrain it. If you take the Gromovytsia, you will destroy the last barrier we have built for centuries." He sharply lowered his staff, and a beam of crimson light shot from the crystal, striking the floor near Taras, splitting the stone. The molfar phantoms seemed even more unrestful, their moans intensifying. Lina knew there was no time for argument. She lunged towards the Gromovytsia, feeling her blood, still pulsating from the forgotten city, react to the artifact's energy. She reached out to the Gromovytsia and, without hesitation, touched it.
Lina's blood touched the surface of the Gromovytsia, and it responded with a piercing hum. The cave trembled, and the blue glow emanating from the wood became blindingly bright, filling the entire space. The molfar phantoms wailed, retreating as if the flash burned them. The Druid, with their staffs glinting with crimson crystals, froze, their faces beneath their hoods seeming to express a mixture of horror and anger. "What have you done?" thundered the Druid leader's voice, but his words were lost in the growing hum. The Gromovytsia seemed to come alive in Lina's hands. She felt a power, ancient and potent, flow into her, piercing her to the bone. It was not just energy, but the pure wrath of nature, concentrated within the wood. Lina's hair became electrified, and her eyes briefly glowed with the same blue light as the artifact. Taras, standing nearby, felt the air around them fill with static electricity, and the smell of ozone became unbearable. Suddenly, a dazzling beam of blue lightning erupted from within the Gromovytsia. It struck the cave ceiling, splitting the stone, and dispersed into dozens of discharges that pierced the air. The molfar phantoms, upon contact with the lightning, disintegrated into dust, their moans turning into short gasps. The wolf-like shadows that the Druids had brought with them howled in pain, their forms trembling, and they began to dissolve like smoke in the wind. The Druids retreated, their faces contorted with horror. One of them, struck by a discharge, cried out, and his staff fell from his hands, its crystals shattering and turning into black dust. The Druid leader, though shocked, quickly composed himself. "She activated it. The curse," he hissed, raising his hand. The crystal on his staff flared with a bright crimson light, and the air between them and Lina trembled, as if forming an invisible wall. "You will not leave here alive," he thundered, and stones began to fall from the lightning-formed cracks in the ceiling. Lina felt the Gromovytsia tearing from her hands, pulsing with its own will. "We have to run," she shouted to Taras as the ceiling began to collapse. They rushed towards the only exit, which led back into the tunnel. The Druids, recovering from their shock, began to attack. Beams of crimson light shot from their staffs, trying to cut off their escape. Taras drew his knife, though he knew its futility against magic, but he was ready to fight. The Gromovytsia in Lina's hand suddenly flared again, and a new stream of lightning erupted from it, striking the falling stones, shattering them into small fragments, and forcing the Druids to take cover. "It's protecting us," Taras gasped, feeling the warmth of the amulet on his neck merge with the Gromovytsia's energy. This artifact was not just a key, it was a weapon. Lina, clutching the Gromovytsia, which was not just wood, but like the living heart of a storm, felt a connection to it, as if it were an extension of her own being.
They burst out of the cave into the same tunnel they had entered. The ground behind them collapsed, sealing the entrance and leaving the Druids trapped inside. The forest met them with an even thicker darkness and the smell of smoke from the lightning discharge. The Gromovytsia in Lina's hands now glowed more calmly, but its blue light cut through the darkness, illuminating their path. "What was that? Did we trap them?" Taurus asked, his voice hoarse. "We haven't trapped them for long," Lina replied, looking at the cracks on the artifact's surface, from which bluish runes emerged. These runes were similar to the ones that had appeared on the altar in the Forgotten City. They were not just signs, but ancient writings that contained information. She ran her finger over them, and a brief vision flashed in her mind. She saw the face of a woman almost identical to herself, with the same glowing eyes. She stood by an altar similar to the one in the Forgotten City, speaking words that sounded like a hymn. Beside her stood a man resembling Taurus, with a wound on his arm. They both shed blood on the altar, not to imprison evil, but to gain knowledge. Knowledge about the entity, about how to stop it. The vision showed other artifacts, a stone in the snows, a dagger in a forest of ghosts, an hourglass in the sands, a ring in the fog, a crystal in the ice, ashes in the red rocks. Each of them was connected to another seal, another aspect of the entity. The woman in the vision spoke, "We leave these keys. Our descendants will find them when the time comes. Only their blood, the blood of the line, can awaken them. Only together will they triumph." The vision faded, leaving Lina trembling. "Taurus," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "These are not just artifacts. These are keys left by our ancestors. They knew the entity would return, and they left us a path." Taurus paled. "So we're not just treasure hunters. We're their descendants. And this was all planned?" Lina nodded. "Yes, the Gromovytsia is not just a weapon, but a beacon. It points the way to the next key." She ran her finger over the runes on the Gromovytsia, and they transformed into a new map that glowed with a bright blue light. It depicted a snow-capped mountain range and a small pulsing dot at its peak. Tibet, a monastery hidden in the mountains. That's where the next artifact is. The tension of the first battle receded, giving way to a sense of a grand, overwhelming mission. Their destiny was not just to find treasures, but to complete an ancient battle that their ancestors had begun. The forest around them seemed silent, listening to their decision. They were just two people, but the responsibility for the fate of the world rested on their shoulders, and they knew they could not refuse.
The escape from the cave was just the beginning. Taurus and Lina dashed through the night forest, which seemed to have come alive, trying to ensnare them. Branches lashed at their faces, and roots like claws clung to their feet, tripping them at every step. The Gromovytsia in Lina's hands glowed with a faint blue light, illuminating their path, but this light attracted something else. From the depths of the forest, a low, drawn-out sound, similar to the creaking of old trees, but at the same time eerily resembling a whisper, emanated. These were the forest spirits, which the old man had told them about when they hired the UAZ. They were not malicious, but their presence was oppressive, enveloping them in a cold that penetrated to their bones. "They're not aggressive, but they confuse," Lina whispered, recalling ancient legends about those who lost their way in the Carpathian thickets. Taurus tried to orient himself by the stars, but the dense tree canopies completely obscured the sky. The map on the Gromovytsia, though showing the way to Tibet, provided no directions for exiting this part of the forest. "We need to find a river or a road," he shouted, realizing they could be lost here forever. The amulets around their necks pulsed stronger, as if warning of increasing danger. Suddenly, they stumbled upon a clearing where the air was heavy with the scent of flowers and fresh earth. In the center of the clearing stood a massive ancient oak tree,
its branches reaching the ground like veins. A thin stream, sparkling in the light of the Gromovytsia, flowed from beneath its roots. "Maybe it's a spring?" Lina whispered, approaching closer. But as soon as she took a step, figures emerged from the shadows underneath the oak, not wolf shadows, but translucent, human-like figures that radiated sorrow and pain. These were mavkas, spirits of deceased girls who lure travelers into their webs. Their eyes were empty, and their faces beautiful but distorted by eternal sorrow. They did not speak, but their presence was too palpable, as if hundreds of voices whispered at once. Lina remembered how in her vision their ancestors shed blood not only to imprison the entity, but also to protect the worlds from its influence. Perhaps these mavkas were not inherently evil, but their essence had been twisted by what happened in the Forgotten City, or by the influence of ancient forces. The mavkas slowly extended their hands toward them, as if inviting them to join their eternal dance. Taras felt his consciousness grow hazy, and his legs became heavy. "Don't look into their eyes!" Lina cried, her voice ringing out like a bell, breaking the spell. The amulet around her neck flared, and the mavkas recoiled, their forms trembling. Lina understood. The light of the artifact, combined with her blood, was painful for them. It was a power that could both heal and repel. But as soon as Lina looked away to check on Taras, a mavka reached out and touched his shoulder. His eyes became glassy, and he began to move slowly towards her, his face wearing an empty smile. "Taras, no!" Lina cried, realizing that these creatures were not just spirits, they stole minds. She grabbed the Gromovytsia and, gathering all her will, directed its light at the mavka holding Taras. A blue bolt of lightning erupted from the wood, not hitting the mavka itself, but striking the ground near its feet. The mavka shrieked, not a moan, but a piercing, distorted cry of pain, and disintegrated like brittle glass, leaving behind only the smell of rotten grass. Taras shuddered, as if waking from a dream, and looked at Lina, his eyes slowly focusing. What happened?" Lina, breathing heavily, nodded towards the scattered mavka shadows. "They tried to lure us in, but their danger was not over." Again, a prolonged wolf howl echoed, much closer than before. It was the Druids. They seemed to have circled the cave or found another path. Their voices drifted from the darkness, chanting ancient words that sent shivers down their spines. "Their influence on the forest is stronger than we thought," Lina whispered. She understood that the Druids were not just local sorcerers, but heirs to an ancient power, perhaps even older than the molfars whose sanctuaries they guarded. "We have to find a way out of the forest before they surround us," Taras said, clutching his knife tightly. He felt the amulet around his neck continued to pulse, as if indicating direction. It was not just a source of power, but a compass for their mission. Lina looked at the Gromovytsia. The runes on it, which had pointed to Tibet, had vanished, but a new pattern appeared, an arrow pointing west, towards sparser trees and possibly civilization. They dashed towards it, hearing behind them the growing hum of the Druids' magic and the approaching wolf shadows. The forest became increasingly lighter, though still covered by canopies. Ahead, something resembling an old stone wall, collapsed in many places, loomed. This was the sanctuary's boundary. They ran with all their might, knowing that every second was precious. It was a race for survival.
At the sanctuary's edge, where the forest thinned and the outlines of an old stone wall emerged from the thickets, Taras and Lina felt the pressure somewhat recede. The amulets around their necks still pulsed warmly, but the Gromovytsia in Lina's hands no longer glowed as intensely, as if its power was tied to the depths of the sanctuary. They clambered over a ruined section of the wall, and beyond it, The forest no longer seemed so oppressive. The air felt lighter, and even birdsong returned, though somewhat muffled after their ordeal. "Looks like we made it out," Taurus exhaled, looking back. He was exhausted, his hand throbbing from the cut and his face scratched by branches. Lina also looked tired, but a spark of determination gleamed in her eyes. They walked for several more hours, moving westward as indicated by the new pattern on the Gromovytsia. At dawn, weary, they stumbled upon an old hut standing at the forest's edge, miraculously preserved from wind and time. A thin stream of smoke curled from its chimney, and Taurus immediately caught the scent of freshly baked bread. "People," he whispered, and the words sounded like salvation. An elderly woman lived in the hut, her face etched with deep wrinkles, and her eyes watched wisely and penetratingly, as if she saw much more than an ordinary person. She wasn't surprised by their appearance, merely nodded, inviting them inside. "I was expecting you," she said, in a quiet but firm voice, pouring them herbal tea. Taurus and Lina exchanged glances. "Are you a molfar?" Lina asked, her voice barely audible. The woman simply smiled, and something ancient and wise flickered in her eyes. "My name is Yarina, and I know who you are. Your blood smells of antiquity, and your amulets whisper of an endless path." She looked at the Gromovytsia in Lina's hands. "You have awakened what has slumbered for centuries, and this is just the beginning of your journey." Yarina told them about the Druids, not local inhabitants, but an ancient order that came to the Carpathians thousands of years ago to guard the boundaries between worlds. They were the keepers of the seals that restrained not only spirits, but also something far older and more powerful, remnants of the entity that sought to break into our world. The molfars, local sorcerers, were merely echoes of ancient knowledge passed down through generations, but the Druids possessed a full understanding. Their path is control. They believe that only they can hold back evil, even if it means imprisoning it forever, without a chance for complete destruction, Yarina explained. Your ancestors, Taurus, Lina, had a different path. They believed the entity could be defeated, not just imprisoned. They sought keys that not only restrain it, but weaken it and ultimately destroy it. The Gromovytsia is the first of such things. It is not a seal, but a tool capable of piercing the darkness. Yarina stood up, walked to an old wooden table, and unrolled a faded map lying there. These mountains hold many secrets. You must be prepared to meet not only those who seek evil, but also those who, believing themselves protectors, will become your enemies. She traced her finger across the map, pointing to a distant spot in the Himalayas. This is what the Gromovytsia seeks, the eye of the eternal storm. It is hidden in a monastery where time stands still, and monks guard it from wind and snow. Yarina gave them a small pouch of dried herbs. This will protect you from forest spirits and divert the Druids' attention. But remember, your blood is your strongest charm and your greatest weapon. She ran her hand over the cuts on their palms, and the wounds began to close before their eyes. This was not magical healing, but an acceleration of natural processes, indicating Yarina's ancient power. Taurus and Lina felt new energy spread through their veins, and their minds became clearer. "We are ready," Lina said, her voice firm. They understood that their mission was far grander than they had imagined, and that their ancestors had left them not only a task, but a legacy of power. At dawn, they bid farewell to Yarina, leaving the hut behind. The Gromovytsia, wrapped in a piece of cloth, was heavy, but its presence no longer frightened them. Instead, it instilled confidence. They found a road leading to the nearest town where they could reach an airport. The forest, which had previously seemed like a gloomy trap, now appeared merely as another obstacle on their path. Ahead lay Tibet, a new artifact, and another confrontation with forces seeking to control the world. Taurus and Lina walked side by side, ready for anything. They were heirs to an ancient struggle, and their journey had just begun.
The journey from the Carpathians to Tibet was exhausting. After meeting Yarina and realizing the true scale of their mission, Taras and Lina felt not only fatigue, but also a crushing responsibility. They reached the nearest airport, but covering such a distance without attracting undue attention proved to be a difficult task. Their route involved several transfers, and each airport seemed to them a hotbed of potential danger. The amulets around their necks would dim and then begin to pulse faintly, as if reacting to the hidden energies of the world or their proximity to another nexus of the ancient struggle. Lina kept the Gromovytsia in her hands, carefully wrapped in cloth, but she could feel how the wood still responded to her touch, especially after its activation in the cave. She occasionally ran her fingers over its surface, searching for clues or new runes. Lina and Taras understood that they were no longer just adventurers or treasure hunters. They had become pawns, but with their own free will in an ancient game between the forces of light and darkness, a game their ancestors had started. The vision Lina had in the Carpathians pulled back the veil on their family's past. Their ancestors, it turned out, were not just priests, but part of an ancient lineage endowed with unique blood, capable of activating magical artifacts and opposing the entity. This knowledge, passed down through generations, had been almost entirely lost, save for mystical traces in genetic memory and perhaps in dreams. Lina recalled her grandmother's tales of family power, of ancestral whispers, which she had once dismissed as mere fairy tales. Now she understood that these were not fairy tales, but veiled warnings and hints at their true purpose. This heritage explained many things: why their blood could activate altars, why the amulets found in the Forgotten City resonated with them, and why the entity so desperately tried to stop them. Taras, though he didn't experience visions like Lina, felt an energetic connection to the amulet and trusted her implicitly. He had seen the lightning erupt from the Gromovytsia, watched shadows dissolve, and witnessed Druids who considered themselves omnipotent forced to retreat. He remembered his own doubts, his skepticism about tourist tales, and how easily he had dismissed the guide's warnings. Now he understood that there were things in the world that transcended logic and science, and that their mission was far more important than any material treasure. After several days of exhausting travel, they finally arrived in Kathmandu. The bustling city, full of vibrant colors, the scent of spices, and the hum of prayer wheels, was a sharp contrast to the gloomy Carpathian forests. But even here, Taras and Lina felt something ancient beneath the surface. The amulets around their necks pulsed more frequently, and the Gromovytsia hummed faintly, indicating the proximity of a new energy node. According to the map, the next artifact, the Eye of the Eternal Storm, was hidden in a remote monastery high in the Himalayas. Getting there was another challenge entirely. They hired an experienced Sherpa, a man with a weathered face and deep, calm eyes, named Tenzin. He agreed to guide them to the monastery, warning them of harsh weather conditions, avalanches, and mountain spirits who disliked uninvited guests. Taras noticed Tenzin's respectful glance at Lina's amulet when she accidentally revealed it. "Ancient signs," the Sherpa murmured, but said nothing more. The ascent into the mountains was perilous. Snow and icy wind lashed at their faces, and the thin air made breathing difficult. Rocky paths that plunged into abysses demanded utmost caution. Tenzin, silent and resilient, led the way, his stride light despite his heavy backpack. He told them ancient legends of the Himalayas, of hidden cities, enlightened masters, snow spirits, and monasteries that existed beyond time and space. Taras and Lina listened, understanding that every such story might contain a grain of truth. The Gromovytsia vibrated in Lina's backpack. Occasionally a faint blue glow escaped from it through the cloth, causing Tenzin's concern. "That's a powerful charm,"
he said, but his gaze was filled with questions. On the 5th day of the ascent, just when they were about to despair, the outlines of a monastery emerged through the dense fog that enveloped the summit. It was massive, carved directly into the rock, with high towers and roofs covered in eternal snows. Thousands of prayer flags fluttered in the wind, their colors almost blending with the snow's whiteness. But something was wrong. An invisible storm raged around the monastery. Although the wind was furious, the snow fell erratically, creating bizarre vortices that swirled around the walls like a protective barrier. "The eye of the eternal storm," Lina whispered, her voice trembling with realization. This was what Yarina had spoken of. The monastery was surrounded by an eternal, incomprehensible energy. Tenzin suddenly stopped, his face pale. "The monastery does not welcome. No one can pass through the storm." He looked terrified, and Taras realized the Sherpa wasn't going any further. Lina took the Gromovytsia from her backpack. Its blue glow intensified, and the runes on it began to pulse, pointing directly at the monastery. Through the storm. Their mission was here, beyond this immountable barrier.
The monastery on the mountaintop, shrouded in an incomprehensible storm, seemed like an impregnable fortress. Tenzin, their guide, flatly refused to go further, his face pale with fear as he pointed at the swirling snow and ice that ceaselessly circled the abode. "It's the mountain's wrath," he whispered, his voice trembling. "No one can pass through this. It's the eye of the storm." Taras tried to persuade him, but saw such terror in the Sherpa's eyes that he understood further appeals were futile. "We're on our own," he told Lina, and she nodded. The Gromovytsia in her hands pulsed stronger, its blue glow piercing through the cloth as if showing the way. This artifact was their compass and perhaps their only chance to overcome the barrier. The cold was biting, the icy wind lashed at their faces, and the snow seemed to penetrate their clothes. They moved towards the storm, Lina holding the Gromovytsia in front of her like a shield. As soon as they stepped into its bounds, the wind intensified, and the snowflakes turned into icy needles that scratched their skin. The air hummed, and figures began to form from the swirling snow, translucent, icy spirits that radiated an eerie cold. These were the monk spirits Tenzin had mentioned, but not like the molfar phantoms. These were aggressive, their faces contorted with fury, and their hands, made of ice and snow, tried to grab them. "They're protecting the monastery," Lina cried, and the Gromovytsia in her hands flared with a bright bolt of lightning. The lightning scattered into countless sparks that struck the icy spirits, causing them to disintegrate into snow and vapor that dissolved in the storm. Taras, gripping his knife, stayed close, trying to fend off the spirits that broke through the Gromovytsia's protection. He felt the biting cold penetrate his clothes, threatening to freeze him to the bone. The amulet around his neck glowed faintly, but its warmth could not withstand this all-consuming cold. Lina, focused on the Gromovytsia, tried to find a pattern in the storm that would allow them to pass. The runes on the Gromovytsia flickered, and the map, integrated into the wood, began to change, showing not only the path to the monastery, but also some internal patterns, like a schematic of its magical defense. Suddenly, amidst the wind's howl, they heard a low, drawn-out chant. It emanated from the monastery, blending with the storm's hum, and sent shivers down their spines. "It's the monks," Lina whispered. "They're using the storm as a weapon." These were not the same Druids, but their methods were similar. Control over natural forces to hold the artifact. Snow vortices intensified, and from them began to form gigantic ice blocks that flew towards them. Taras barely managed to push Lina aside when one such block shattered against a rock nearby, showering them with icy fragments. The Gromovytsia flared again, releasing a powerful energy pulse that dispersed the next blocks. But this exhausted Lina. She felt her strength leaving her, and the blood in her veins, which had previously seemed like a source of inexhaustible energy, now pulsed with pain. "We need to get to the gates,"
Taras shouted, pointing to the massive wooden monastery gates which were barely visible through the storm. It was their only chance. They rushed towards it, fighting their way through the resistance of the icy spirits and flying ice shards. Finally, they reached the gates themselves. They were locked, and runes glowing with a faint blue light similar to the Gromovytsia's radiance were carved into their surface. But these runes were not runes of power like on the artifact, but runes of sealing. Lina pressed the Gromovytsia against the gates, and the blue glow from the wood merged with the runes, causing a faint hum. "They're interacting," she whispered. But it wasn't enough. The storm around them intensified, and the icy spirits began to gather in a tight circle, preparing for a final assault. The chanting from inside the monastery grew louder, almost deafening, and Taras felt his consciousness begin to blur. "We won't be able to force our way through," he said, looking at Lina. She nodded, her gaze fixed on the gates. A sacrifice is needed." She remembered the vision of her ancestors who shed blood to activate artifacts. She knew she would have to do it again. Lina drew Taras's knife and without hesitation slashed her palm, allowing blood to drip on the gate's runes. As soon as the blood touched the stone, the runes flared with a bright red light and then changed their color to a dazzling blue. The monks chanting inside the monastery ceased, and the storm around the monastery suddenly began to subside. The icy spirits wailed in pain, their bodies began to melt, turning into drops of water that fell onto the snow. The gate slowly opened, releasing warmth and the smell of incense from within. The eye of the storm was disturbed. They had done it.
For adventure reading. The monastery gates slowly opened, releasing a puff of warm, spicy air that smelled of incense and wax. The storm around the abode had subsided, leaving behind only silence, broken only by the distant wailing of the wind on the mountaintops. Taras and Lina stepped inside, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. The walls were adorned with frescoes depicting scenes from Buddhist mythology, but among them were stranger, older symbols, similar to those they had seen in the Forgotten City and on the Gromovytsia. "The eye of the eternal storm," Lina whispered, her gaze sweeping over the images of meditating monks whose eyes were closed but emanated an inner glow. They felt the monastery breathe like a living organism, filled with ancient, incomprehensible energy. They walked through long, intricate corridors where each turn revealed new secrets. Some halls were dedicated to prayer, others to the study of ancient texts, and still others to enigmatic rituals. The air grew heavier, and the pulsing of the amulets around their necks intensified, indicating the artifact's proximity. In one of the corridors, they came across a library, a vast room filled with shelves of inscribed scrolls and ancient books. Lina stopped, her eyes scanning the faded covers. She felt that answers to many questions lay here. Taras, meanwhile, listened intently. He thought he heard a faint whisper emanating from somewhere deep within the library. It sounded like hundreds of voices at once, but they were so quiet that discerning the words was impossible. Suddenly, figures emerged from behind one of the bookshelves, not shadows, but translucent monk spirits, different from those outside. These were calmer, their faces expressing sorrow rather than anger. They did not attack, but merely stood in our way, their gazes filled with an inexpressible longing. One of them, the oldest, extended a hand towards us. His finger pointed to an ancient scroll resting on a stone pedestal in the center of the hall. It was not just a scroll, but some kind of guide. Lina instinctively understood that these spirits were guardians, not aggressors. They didn't want the artifact to be taken, but they offered no direct resistance, as if their mission was merely to warn. "They want us to understand," Lina whispered, cautiously approaching the scroll. Taras, clinging to Lina, felt the cold intensifying around them, although there was no physical threat. The amulet around his neck grew hot, as if trying to counteract this cold despair. He understood that these were not just guardians, but souls trapped here, perhaps due to an ancient ritual or curse. Lina unrolled the scroll. It was written in an ancient language, but the symbols on it, like those on the Gromovytsia, were intuitively understandable. It was the history of the monastery, its role in the seal system, and the fate of the Eye of the Storm. The scroll explained that the monastery was built over an energy node capable of stabilizing not only weather phenomena, but also the very boundaries of reality where the entity tried to break through. The Eye of the Storm was not just an artifact, but the heart of the monastery, controlling these energy flows. The monks, devoted to ancient tradition, believed that only constant meditation and rituals could keep the eye in a state of calm. In one section of the scroll, Lina saw an image of 3 concentric circles connected by a line, the same as on the seals. Beside it was an inscription she translated. When the sky tears and souls scream, the blood of the lineage's descendants will heal the heart of the storm, but only with the power of light can it find its way to peace. This was a prophecy about them, about their blood, and about the Gromovytsia. The monks knew that sooner or later someone would come to activate the Eye of the Storm. The spirits surrounding them began to hum, their voices merging into a mournful choir as if pleading with them not to do it. They didn't want their peace disturbed. Taras clutched his knife. "They're afraid we'll disturb their peace?" Lina nodded. "But if we don't take the Eye of the Storm, the entity will break through. That's a bigger risk." They reached the center of the hall where a dull blue glowing stone lay on a marble pedestal, the Eye of the Eternal Storm. It radiated a cold that made the air around it shimmer. Complex patterns resembling a blizzard were engraved on its surface. As soon as they approached, the monk spirits rushed towards them, their moans growing louder and their hands stretched out, trying to push them away from the eye. This was their final warning. Taras drew the Gromovytsia and aimed its blue light at the spirits. They recoiled, but did not dissolve as opposed to the shadows before. These were souls, not mere constructs of dark magic. "We have to get through," Taras said, his voice firm. Lina nodded, realizing they'd have to cause pain to these unfortunate souls.
The Eye of the Eternal Storm, glowing with a faint blue light, lay on the marble pedestal, drawing Taras and Lina's gaze. The spirits of the monks who guarded it approached, their sorrowful moans filling the hall, pleading for them to retreat. Lina felt their pain, their age-old weariness from endless vigil. She knew these souls were not malicious, but their longing for peace was so strong that they were ready to resist anyone who dared to disturb it. Taras clutched the Gromovytsia firmly in his hand, its blue glow countering the cold gleam of the eye. "We have to do this, Lina," he whispered, his voice firm, yet tinged with internal struggle. They understood that every step forward was an act of disturbing peace, but the alternative, the full awakening of the entity, was far more terrifying. Lina nodded, her gaze fixed on the eye. "Yes, we must." She reached out for the artifact, and the moment her fingers touched the cold stone, her consciousness erupted with a new, vivid vision. This time, she saw not just fragments of their ancestors' past, but a deeper connection between all the artifacts. She saw an ancient ritual circle, created long before the first civilizations. This circle consisted of 7 nodes, each connected to a specific element or force: earth, water, air, fire, ice, light, darkness. Each node had its own artifact, and together they formed a kind of shield capable of restraining the oldest and most terrible of all entities, primordial chaos, from which, according to legends, the world itself emerged. She saw how the priests, their distant ancestors, did not just activate these artifacts, but integrated a part of their own essence, their blood, their knowledge, into them. They created not just seals, but living connections that passed through centuries until they reached her and Taras. Each artifact was part of a huge global network that maintained the balance between worlds. The eye of the eternal storm was the node of water and air, capable of controlling the elements and stabilizing astral portals through which the entity could penetrate. If the eye was not activated, or activated incorrectly, it would unleash forces capable of destroying an entire region. The vision showed a massive wave of energy erupting from the eye, consuming all life in the vicinity. It was a terrifying scenario. The vision ended as abruptly as it began, leaving Lina trembling, but with a clear understanding of their mission. Taras, these are not just artifacts. These are parts of a huge puzzle that our ancestors created to contain chaos, she exclaimed, her voice filled with new realization. Taras, seeing her state, hugged her tightly. We'll do this together, Lina, as always. The monk spirits approached, their indistinct forms swirling around them as if pleading. They were caught between the duty of their ancestors and the pain of innocent souls. Lina looked at the eye resolutely. We need the Gromovytsia and blood. She knew that the Gromovytsia, as an artifact of light and lightning, could direct the eye's energy, controlling it. She placed the Gromovytsia on the altar next to the eye of the storm. The blue glint of the Gromovytsia and the faint glow of the eye began to interact, causing a low hum that filled the hall. The monk spirits wailed, their forms becoming denser, as if they were trying to physically impede them. They could not touch the heroes due to the amulet's protection, but their presence was oppressive. Taras grabbed the Gromovytsia. How do we activate this without destroying everything around us? Lina took his hand, her palms cut already healed, thanks to Yarina, but she pressed it again against the cold stone of the eye. Like in the forgotten city, blood, but this time with intention, with calm. She closed her eyes, trying to focus, pushing away the pain and fear caused by the spirits. Her blood slowly trickled down the eye's surface, and the stone began to pulse brighter. Taras felt the amulet around his neck pulse hotly. He looked at Lina, her face pale but resolute. He knew it was his turn. He cut his already healed palm. This time the pain was sharper, as if the artifact demanded more. His blood dripped on the eye, mixing with Lina's blood. At that very moment, the eye of the eternal storm exploded with a blinding blue light that permeated the hall. The storm outside the monastery, which had previously subsided, now completely disappeared. The sky above the mountains cleared, revealing a starry night. The monk spirits, who had been wailing in pain, now began to dissolve, but not in suffering, but in peace, their faces expressing relief. It was not destruction, but liberation. The chanting from the monastery, which had previously been oppressive, now sounded like a melodic hymn, filled with serenity.
The monastery hall filled with the brilliant blue light that burst from the eye of the eternal storm. The monk spirits, who just a moments before had been moaning in pain, now dissolved not in suffering, but in a deep peace, their faces expressing ancient relief. The wailing of the eternal storm outside the monastery walls completely subsided, and above the Himalayan peaks, a clear, starry sky opened up, stretching above them like an endless velvet dome. Taras and Lina stood, holding hands, their palms still sticky with the blood that had activated the artifact. They felt the monastery, which had previously breathed with tension, now filling with harmony. And the ancient frescoes on the walls seemed to come alive, radiating a soft glow. Lina released the eye, and it, now brilliantly blue, pulsed in the center of the pedestal, like a living heart. The Gromovysia in Taras's hands also calmed, its blue light dimming, merging with the overall atmosphere of tranquility. We did it, Taras whispered, his voice hoarse with tension but filled with immense relief. Lina nodded, her eyes moist with emotion. Tears of relief streamed down her cheeks, washing away dust and fatigue. She felt a heavy burden lift from their shoulders. The monk spirits no longer resisted. They had released their age-old duty and could now finally find peace. Their mission here was complete. She looked at Taras, and in his eyes she saw a reflection of her own feelings, a mixture of exhaustion, triumph, and a new, profound understanding. Their journey had transformed them. They were no longer the carefree treasure hunters who had set out for the forgotten city. They were heirs to an ancient lineage on whose shoulders rested the responsibility for the fate of worlds. Suddenly, the eye of the eternal storm began to slowly rise from the pedestal, emitting an increasingly brighter light. It hovered in the air above them, pulsing like a living organism. New patterns began to appear on its surface, not runes, but complex, constantly shifting symbols, resembling stars in the night sky. The Gromovysia in Taras's hands also hummed, its blue light synchronizing with the eye's blue glow. Lina reached out for the eye, and it slowly descended into her palm. The stone was surprisingly light and warm, and Lina felt a pure, life-giving energy flow into her body, healing her fatigue and pain. She looked at the Gromovysia, which lay in Taras's other hand. These two artifacts resonated, like ancient brothers finally reunited. From the eye of the eternal storm, a faint but clear beam of light shot out, hitting the Gromovysia and merging with its glow. New runes, dimly glowing, began to appear on the Gromovysia's surface. These were not just symbols, but, as Lina intuitively understood, a form of cosmic map. It showed the way, not to a specific place, but to the next stage of their journey. These were coordinates pointing to a location in Japan, but not just a place on a map, but a point that emitted a palpable energy. "It's the blade of the phantom forest," Lina whispered, recalling the vision that had visited her in the Carpathians, the next key. She felt that it would be more difficult than ever before, but also that they were no longer alone. Their ancestors had left them not only a task, but all the necessary tools. They left the monastery as the first rays of dawn began to illuminate the mountaintops. Tenzin, their guide, was waiting for them at the base. His face expressed deep astonishment as he saw that the storm around the monastery had completely vanished and the sky was clear. You did it," he whispered, his eyes filled with awe. Taras and Lina merely nodded, not revealing all the details. They understood that not everyone needed to know about the secrets of ancient powers. Tenzin guided them back to civilization, his respect for them multiplied many times over. A few days later, they were on a plane flying to Japan. The eye of the eternal storm, carefully wrapped, lay in their backpack next to the Gromovysia. Lina held the amulet around her neck, its warmth comforting her, while Taras pondered the challenges ahead. Each new adventure not only brought them closer to their goal, restraining the entity, but also revealed new secrets of their own lineage. They knew that new dangers awaited them, new spirits, and perhaps new guardians who would hinder their mission. But now they were stronger. They had the artifacts, the knowledge of their ancestors, and most importantly, each other. Their struggle was just gaining momentum, and they were ready to face it head on.
If you're still here, it means the shadows didn't scare you away. Subscribe to Darkroom Narratives for more stories that linger long after the lights go out.